Hey, welcome. It's so good to have you with us as we open up the scriptures together, ALC online. Wherever you are joining us from, know that I am so grateful for this time with you. You know, I believe that we weren't created to be by ourselves. We are created to live in community together. And even though we're not physically together, we have this online community, and it's so good to be able to open up the scriptures, to encourage each other, to grow and to become everything that God calls us to be. If you're watching us for the first time, welcome. It's so good to have you join us. Here at ALC, we believe we're called to be a community of hope for our city and beyond. And this is one way we seek to engage other people with the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. Maybe you've joined us because you are looking to make sense of the world in which we live. Maybe your life has taken a turn and it's just caught you totally unawares, and you're now asking questions, and that's a good place to be, because we are in this series called Hope in the Dark. It's really just looking at the Gospel of Mark, because Mark was one of the first books in the New Testament written, and he was writing to encourage, to strengthen the faith, to help the early church make sense of the times in which it found itself. In the same way that so many people are asking questions and looking for the same sorts of things today. You know, the truth is we live in a world which is just totally different to what we imagined we would be in even 3 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. The world is changing so rapidly, and some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And in the midst of that, it creates all sorts of tensions, all sorts of frustrations, all sorts of disappointments and anxieties. And increasingly, people are feeling disenfranchised, they're feeling excluded, they're feeling pushed to the margins. And that's very much like it was for the early church that Mark wrote to encourage. They didn't have COVID, but they had persecution. They were being blamed for so much of what had gone wrong in the Roman Empire. So to be Christian meant to lose your job. It meant to lose your house often. It meant to lose your family. It even meant to lose your life at times. And so they were asking the same sorts of questions many people are asking today. Like, God, where are you in these times? Is this all for nothing? Is the reward only in heaven? Or surely having a relationship with you should make a difference now? And that's why we're doing this series. And I hope that over the next 35 minutes that it will help you make sense of where you find yourself, that you will discover two things. You will have hope wherever you find yourself, but out of that you will be able to carry hope to those around you. And so this short passage we're looking at today helps us understand that in the midst of all of the chaos, all the uncertainty, all of the unpredictability of what is happening in the world, that if we keep our eyes on Jesus and follow him, then we are going to have hope. And out of that, we're going to discover what it means to have joy, to have life in the midst of turmoil. So if you've got your Bible, we'll open up. We are starting in Mark chapter 4, verse 35. As evening came, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Now, just note quickly, this isn't just an ordinary storm. It's not a bad storm. It's a fierce storm. The waves are so high that they begin to fill the boat. So there's this picture of a boat being tossed about on the waves. There is no longer any control, really. They are at the mercy of the weather, and the storm is so bad that they are getting anxious. Then he carries on in verse 38. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on the cushion. The disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown? Don't you care?" Isn't it true that in the midst of anxiety, when we feel overwhelmed by life, when we feel a pressure, when we are discouraged, our natural question is, "God, don't you care?" And really this episode helps us understand that the challenge for us in the midst of life, in the midst of storms, in the midst of whatever is coming against us to undermine our confidence, our hope, our sense of purpose, our sense of meaning, the marks by which we've navigated through life thus far, the challenge is always this: where do we place our hope, and where do we place our trust? You see, really the challenge for the disciples is this: do they place their hope and their confidence in their ability to control a boat, or are they placing it in Jesus? You see, and it's an important question to answer for ourselves, because when we are anxious, when we are fearful, it becomes the lens through which we see life. The way in which we look at the world, our circumstances, even God, is often through what is happening in our life at the time. And certainly this is what had happened for the disciples. Instead of looking at Jesus and thinking, well, if Jesus is asleep, we have nothing to fear, they looked through the lens of fear and thought, well, if Jesus is asleep, it's because he doesn't care. And he goes on in verse 39. So Jesus wakes up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Now, in ancient times, in the times of Jesus, the sea was seen as the territory of evil, of chaos. It was chaotic, it was unpredictable. And so when we read this episode of Jesus calming the storm, it's not simply about Jesus calming a wild sea. It's about Jesus demonstrating his authority. Demonstrating his authority, not just over nature, but over that which the sea represents, which is chaos, which is evil in the world. By turning a great storm into a great calm, Jesus is saying, if you follow me, you have to learn to trust me no matter what. And that's why he goes on in verse 40 and says, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" You see, a miracle is simply this: it's an event that strengthens faith. We look at miracles and we think of them as these big dramatic things, and some of them are, make no mistake. But we've tended to limit miracles to the sphere of healing often. Like we think of people getting out of wheelchairs, of broken limbs being healed, cancers being gone, and those sorts of things. And they are dramatic, they're significant, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But God does a myriad of miracles every day in your life and in mine. Some of them aren't as dramatic. In fact, many of them aren't as dramatic as what we've just seen. But they're there nevertheless to make a point that they are to strengthen our faith. Jesus asked them, where's your faith? Because the purpose of the miracle was not to keep them safe, but to demonstrate they could trust him. That wherever he was, things were okay, because he held authority, he held power, that he cared about them, that he would not let harm fall them, that he would not let harm befall them. Mark records this right in the very beginning of his gospel, in the opening chapters of his gospel, simply because he's wanting to remind his hearers, and through them you and I, that in the midst of everything that's happening around us, our faith should give us a confidence. It should be strengthened as we look at the way that God works on our behalf. And it should give us a peace where we recognize that no matter what is happening, if Jesus is with us, who can be against us? That we need not be anxious. That we can trust him, that he has got this. It may not track the way we want, but he's holding us in the palm of his hand, and so long as he's holding us, it doesn't matter what's trying to come into our boat. The waves can come over the edge, but they won't overwhelm us. They won't get the better of us. Jesus is in control. And if Mark left it there, we'd be happy. But he goes on in verse 41. The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." So now their fear turns from the waves and the storm to Jesus. You know, and as I read this, I'm reminded of a period in Israel's life when they went through a storm, so to speak, and God did a miracle. And I can't help but contrast the disciples' reaction with their reaction. In Exodus, we read this is after God had delivered them out of slavery, taken them through the Red Sea, and was taking them to the promised land. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him, and they put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Contrast that with the disciples. These guys saw something equally, in fact, probably more dramatic in some ways, and they were filled with awe. The disciples were filled with fear. They put their trust, their faith in the Lord, and now the disciples are questioning them. And really, I think that one of the points that Mark is wanting to make in that is that will the disciples learn to trust God no matter what? You see, because that's really your issue and mine, isn't it? That in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of the world in which we find ourselves, in the midst of so many changes, in the midst of despair, of disappointment, of anxiety, when life doesn't go the way we want, will we trust God no matter what? Will we look to him for our hope, or will we look to ourselves and to other things? And I find it ironic as I think about this, that here are the disciples who get angry with Jesus for being asleep in their time of need, and yet some of them are going to go to sleep in his hour of need. So what does this have to do with us if we're going to live more fully out of hope and experience the life that God has called us to in the midst of wherever we find ourselves? Well, verse 36 makes a significant point. So they get in the boat and they leave the crowds behind them. You see, I want you to note two things. First of all, other boats followed. No matter what you're going through in life at the moment, no matter how overwhelmed, how frustrated, how disappointed, how discouraged, how whatever you are feeling, you are not alone. The disciples went, but other boats followed. You see, here at ALC, we make a big thing about three pillars of our church: connect, grow, and serve. Because we believe that without these three, we can't be all that God's called us to be. You see, and we believe that we're called to connect, not just with God, but with one another as well. And that's why we make a big thing of what we call connect groups, of groups that meet during the week and hang out and socialize, as well as sort of encouraging each other in their faith and in their life. Because it's so easy to become discouraged and lose perspective when we're by ourselves. Isn't it true that when you're lying asleep at night, your problems seem bigger than in the light of day or when you are with other people? You see, the disciples weren't alone, and neither are you. The disciples, when they were anxious, sort of looked at the other boats and, oh, well, there's other boats, they haven't drowned yet. Instead, they just looked to themselves. You see, we need to make sure that we carry one another in our faith. This is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. He says, all of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it. You are not meant to do life on your own. This is why we do this week by week online, because we believe that those that we're connecting with, you're part of a community. You're part of us. We're part of you. We're in this together. I cannot do what I do without other people around me. They can't do what they do without other people around them, because we're all part of one body. No matter where you are, you're not alone. No matter what you're going through, you're not alone. Know this: as hard as life may feel at times, as discouraged as you may feel at times, as bewildered, as uncertain as you may be at times, we're here for you. Anytime you can drop us a line, hamish@alc.org.nz. Not only will I pray for you, but I can get in contact. We've got a group of people who will pray. Just knowing that you're part of another group of people can make all the difference. But notice that they pushed out from the shore. You see, they pushed out from the shore, and I think it helps us recognize that hope is not found staying where we were. Hope is not found in the things of this world. Hope is not found standing with everybody else. Hope is found by stepping out and trusting Jesus. Doing what you've always done is not going to change where you are today. It's only stepping out of those and stepping out of what is familiar at times, stepping out of the very things that are creating some of the dynamics in your life that seek to overwhelm you, that you learn to trust Jesus. You have to get out of your comfort zone, even when it makes no sense. Whenever Jesus is, that's where your hope comes from. You see, the important thing to note about this episode that Mark records of the storm and Jesus calming the storm, it's not teaching us that we should endure storms in our life patiently, waiting for God to do miraculous things. The emphasis is not on the miracle. The emphasis is on who Jesus is. That's why I said miracles are simply events to strengthen our faith, to remind us who Jesus is. He is the one who created the heavens and the earth. He is the one who purposefully and fearfully and wonderfully created you. He's the one that established you and made plans for your life, who's numbered the hairs on your head. He's the one who carries you. And so when we take our focus off the miracle and place it back on Jesus, the miracle worker, because he holds all power, he can do these things, suddenly it changes our perspective and gives us hope. Don't just focus on the miracle. We need miracles. We need our faith strengthened. But the purpose of strengthening our faith is to get us to look beyond our circumstances to the one who holds all things in the palm of his hand. You see, the problem for so many of us is we've become to treat Christianity almost like a refuge from the uncertainties and the storms in life, like it's the one thing that hasn't changed. Christianity's been around 2,000 years, faith is there, it's the one stable thing I have in my life. Christianity is not a refuge from storms. You see, it's not about the storms, it's about Jesus with us in the storm. Faith is about recognizing that Jesus has already won the battle, so that no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what is raging around us in life, we have nothing to fear. In fact, this is what Paul says in Romans. If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for his own? No one. Who then will condemn us? No one. For Christ Jesus died for us and was raised to life for us. Can anything ever separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity or are persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death? No. Despite all these things, overwhelming victory is yours through Christ who loves us. And I am convinced that nothing, get this, nothing can ever separate us from God's love. Your past can't separate you from God's love. That thing that you wrestle with, that you know is wrong, can't separate you from God's love. The storm that you're going through can't separate you from God's love. The decisions that you've made that you regret can't separate you from God's love. The sense of isolation, the sense of frustration, nothing can separate you from God's love. Neither our fears for today or our worries about tomorrow. What's happening in the world at the moment, how you've responded, or perhaps how you have reacted, can't separate you from God's love. Nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus, our Lord. You see, the emphasis has always got to remain on Jesus. He is our hope in the dark. He is our confidence in the storm. He is the Saviour that is going to make a way when we can't find it, when we can't see it. That's where our hope comes from. You see, one of the things about faith is recognizing it's about a relationship with Jesus. And we've got to learn to live out of that. So often we slip into habits and we forget the relationship. You know, I've been married 30-something years now, and we have our routines, but we deliberately choose to break those on a regular basis to remind ourselves of each other, to not take each other for granted, to rekindle the romance, to keep things alive, so to speak. because we don't want to fall into bad habits. We don't want to just be a form of a married couple. We want to be a couple who enjoy one another, who delight in one another, whose confidence and hope and love is in one another, not for what we have as a consequence. And Paul wrote all of this as a man who had been in jail. He says, I was pressed on every side by troubles. He'd been shipwrecked, he'd been beaten, he'd been persecuted. But he says we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. Your hope in the dark, your hope in life, the thing that you're looking for is not a change in your circumstance. It's a renewal of a relationship with Jesus. It's getting back to where it all started, by trusting Him with your life and saying, you know, Lord, you can do a better job of this than me, and then tracking with Him no matter where it goes. Another thing about this passage to recognize, you know, I said about there was other boats with them. Those boats represent the church. You see, we tend to personalize our faith and make it about us. The boat is about us, and so long as Jesus is in my boat, then I'm going to be okay. And I get that, and that's perfectly fine. You know, we've got a tension we have to hold constantly between a personal faith and a corporate expression of that. You see, I have a personal relationship with Jesus, but not at the expense of other people. We belong to one another, as Paul said. But if we're going to be hope carriers, what happens is, the reason I draw attention to the fact that the boats represent the church is that if we're going to be hope carriers, we can't make it about ourselves. We can't make it about just what's God going to do in my life. God, I need you to turn up, and I need you to do this, I need you to do that. We need to learn to constantly live out of our relationship with Jesus for the good of others and for the glory of God. You see, the reality is that the reason that so many need hope in the dark right now is because it's not just a personal thing. It just seems that there's been so many things, a convergence of so many things, including COVID, over the last few years, where it has just changed the world upside down, where things that we used to navigate by are no longer, where values are being questioned and tossed out, where things that we thought would always be there are no longer, where even history is trying to be rewritten to tell a different story that suits us today, rather than account for what happened and what has brought us to where we are. These things are universal. And it's not just we that need hope, others need hope as well. Think about the things that cause you to lie in bed at night and get anxious, that give you stress, that make you fearful. Think about those storms that threaten you, that seek to overwhelm you, to discourage you. If these things cause you to respond with anxiety, with apprehension, with fear, how much more do you think they unsettle people without faith who do not know hope? You see, the calming of the storm is a demonstration that God reigns, and that He wants us to be places of refuge, just as He is our refuge, so that others caught in the storms can experience what we've experienced. He wants us to take that same authority and that same power and speak into the storms of other people's lives, so that they can find hope in the midst of their darkness, just as we have found it for ourselves. We have to trust God so that we can be beacons of hope for others, because if we don't, who else will? So let me quickly just share with you some ways that we can do that, some things that we need to grapple with, so that we become hope carriers and bring hope to others, not just receive it ourselves. The first one is really quite simply this: don't live down to the world. Don't live as everybody else does. Don't get caught up in all the things that are happening around you the way that everybody else is. Be different. Be a hope carrier. There are so many conspiracy theories floating around at the moment. There are so many ideas. There are so many thoughts. There are so many divisions that it's so easy to get caught up in all of these and end up living down to the world, thinking like other people, living like other people, not living with hope, not living with purpose, not living up to God. If we're going to be hope carriers, if you're going to have hope, you need to live hope. And that means don't live down to the world, but live up to God. We need to be different. I'm not saying ignore what's happening. I'm not saying be ignorant of what's happening, but recognize that what is happening is simply an expression of something greater. And in the midst of that, remember this, what it says in Chronicles: wealth and honor come from you alone, but you rule over everything. God is in control of everything. Power and might are in your hand, and at your discretion, people are made great and given strength. Politicians, activists, commentators, media personalities, they may be shaping the narrative, they may be shaping the story at the moment, and that may be undermining some of your confidence and some of your sense of stability in life and causing you to feel pushed to the side. And I get that, and I'm not saying we ignore that or we be ignorant of it, but remember, God rules over everything. Our hope comes not from those who make decisions, but from the one who's in control of those who are in control. Don't live down to the world, live up to God. As a consequence, here's another thing that you need to take on board if we're going to be hope carriers. Don't be anxious. Just don't be anxious. I know we live in anxious times, I get that, but don't let that make you anxious. Don't let the anxiety of others flow over into your life. Don't let the uncertainty and don't let the politics and don't let all of those things make you anxious. In Philippians, Paul writes, don't worry about anything. He's not saying don't be ignorant of it. He's saying instead pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He's done. Why? Because then you'll experience God's peace, which exceeds anything you can understand. His peace will guard your heart and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. You see, the disciples became fearful for their life, and they were anxious because they weren't focused on Jesus. They were focused on what was happening around them. And even when Jesus did a miracle, that anxiety was still there because they hadn't yet got their head around who Jesus really was. That's why Paul says, don't let things rob you of the vitality of your relationship, the knowledge of who God is. When you're starting to feel anxious, when news reports come in, when things begin to push against you and make you feel like, God, where are you? Hit the pause button and tell God what you need and thank Him for who He is. Don't just bottle it up. Don't ignore it, but just say, God, I'm really struggling right now. I'm struggling to make sense of this. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm feeling, God, that people don't, whatever it is. And then thank Him. But I trust you, God. I thank you that you gave up the glory of heaven and came down to die on the cross for our sake and for our salvation. I thank you you're still in control. I thank you that you're the Creator. I thank you, therefore, that you know all this. And you've got a plan. And even though I don't know the plan, I'm going to trust you. Because as we do that, then you'll experience God's peace. You see, sometimes I think we forget this in Hebrews. There's a verse, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. You see, isn't it true that when we feel anxious, we instinctively reach back to a period in the past where we felt things were good, we felt at peace, where we felt in control. That's really what it's about. Well, if God was at work then, don't you think He's still the same at work today and going to be at work tomorrow? If you could trust God then, you can trust Him now. If you could relax in God then, and just rest in Him, you can now, because He is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. In the midst of the current political, the current social, the current cultural and moral shifts that are taking place and undermining so much in people's lives, Jesus is still in control. In fact, and all of the political intrigue and all of the factions and all of the stuff that's happening around the world at the moment. This is how God sees it in Psalm 2. Why are the nations so angry? Why are politicians so angry? Why are people protesting? Why are they trying to get their own way? Why are they trying to make everybody think like them? Why do they waste their time with futile plans? The kings of the earth prepare for battle. The rulers plot together against the Lord and against his anointed one. But get this, the Lord, the one who rules in heaven, laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. You see, in the midst of all of the things that are happening around us and some of the shifts that are trying to be brought to bear that you and I would say are just plain wrong and not honouring of people, let alone of God. In the midst of people trying to cancel those who disagree with them and everything else and make it about their agenda, the Lord laughs. You see, he's still in control. It doesn't faze him. He doesn't think, whoa, they're getting pretty militant. I didn't see that. Well, that is, I read that placard. He doesn't get bent out of shape. He laughs. He's still in control. So don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. Here's another one if we're going to be a hope carrier. Don't get caught up in other people's dramas. If you're going to carry hope, you have to live out of hope, and that means don't get caught up in other people's dramas. So many people respond to conflict, to change, to anxiety by trying to get people on their side, on their part of the equation, so to speak. Because if I can get more people on my side, it makes me feel right. And the more people I get then, and we tell ourselves these lies all the time. That's what lies at the heart of a conspiracy theory. I feel anxious, I feel therefore. And we come up with these incredible stories. Don't get caught up in them. Don't get caught up in them. In fact, this is what Solomon, the wisest person outside of Jesus that's ever lived, has to say in Proverbs. Sin is not ended by multiplying words. In other words, dramas and conspiracies and controversies are not ended by coming up with better ones, with more compelling ones. But the prudent hold their tongues. Just don't get caught up in their dramas. Don't marginalise them, but don't buy into it. Treat people as people, confused, bewildered, disoriented, hurt, frustrated, disappointed, whatever. Respond to that. Everything else is just an expression of, I'm struggling right now. And they're trying to resolve that on their own. They need hope. And the hope is not in a conspiracy. It's not in a drama. It's in a person, Jesus. And if we're going to carry that, we can't afford to get swamped by the storm of their life. We need to speak and silence that storm so that the focus can go from the storm to Jesus, where it rightly belongs. Last one. Live with the end in mind. Our hope comes because this is not all there is. This is not it. Our hope lies in the fact that Jesus was there at the beginning. He came down earth to redeem us, to open a way for us, and he's coming back. He is going to make sense of all this and resolve it in ways that we shouldn't begin to try and anticipate necessarily. I think we are in those times when we're getting ready for him to return. I don't have a problem with that, but what that's going to look like and how that's going to be worked out is not my concern. What gives me hope and what allows me to try and live a life of hope for others and be their hope in their dark as Christ is my hope in my dark is that I've read the end of the book. I live with the end in mind. Look at what it says in Revelation. This is towards the very end, some of the last words in the book of Revelation. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. Remember how I said that back in Jesus' time, the sea was seen as the place of evil, the place of chaos, the place of uncertainty, and that was the source of so much anxiety for people, and how the disciples were on a boat being tossed around and the storm was threatening their very life. When Jesus returns, it's all gone. There's no more sea. There's no more evil. There's no more storms. There's no more anxiety. Now, that's his promise. And already we're beginning to see the outworking of that by faith. You see, his kingdom it's not here in its fullest, but it's still at work. To live with hope, to be a hope carrier, is to recognize that the sea has been calmed already. Yes, the waves are going to come up from time to time, but they've lost their power in our life. That power has been broken through the power of Jesus Christ. That's why I say we don't have to get caught up and be anxious and all these things. We look forward, we go forward with a sense of optimism, a sense of hope that every day we're getting close to that time when the sea will be no more, when evil will be no more, when chaos will be no more, when all of the things that flow out of that are causing us disruption, discouragement, despair, all of those things that come against you in your mind, that come against us in our lives, politically, morally, religiously, all of those things that are seeking to undermine us and toss us about on the seas like the waves tossed around the disciples' boat. Those things are subject to the authority of Jesus. They don't have the last word. He does. And Jesus says, if I'm with you, don't be anxious. Let me strengthen your faith. Let me do a miracle. What do you need? I'm going to do that. Where do you struggle to trust me? Well, step back and let me do something so that, not to remove that from your life to make it better, but so that your faith will be strengthened. So that no matter where you find yourself, no matter how the sea may come up from time to time, your hope will not be diminished. Your faith will be strengthened. And your light will shine, bringing hope to others. So let me encourage you with those thoughts this morning as we seek to be hope carriers in our world. Wherever you find yourself, whatever's going on in your life, the storm does not have the last word. Jesus does. It's not about the miracle. It's about the miracle worker. Wherever he is, you have what you need. Stay close to him. And draw your hope and your confidence from him. He's never disinterested. He's never turning his back on you. Nothing can separate you from his love, from his grace. So no matter what's going on in your life, be encouraged, be strengthened, and be hopeful. Until next time, God bless you.